Get this started. Next up is Katie Bell. She's going to tell us about harnessing the APIs we don't know that exist. And well, Katie is a software engineer with passion for education. She's been running the education track of PyCon for a couple of years now. And she's currently wasting time on side projects, apparently. And well, apparently also preparing talks, so that's one thing. She's starting a new job in a couple of weeks and worked at Grok Learning before.
Cool.
Give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. So this is a fairly beginner level talk, so I apologize to anyone who's like, oh, I know all of this stuff already. So to start off with, this talk is about APIs. Or abstract programming interfaces. This is a very broad term, so I'm going to be a little bit more specific that I'm talking about web APIs. And if you're not familiar with what APIs look like that are publicly available on the web, we're going to go through an example to start off with. So who's seen this site before? Who likes this site? Yeah, all the same hands are up. Who has not seen this site before? OK, go there now. We're also going to go there now. This site will tell you, so it's a public database of data breaches that have occurred. If a company who has a lot of billions of users and someone hacks into their system and then publicly releases usernames and passwords and details on the internet, it is logged here, so you can look up your own email. This is not my email. And it will find any data breaches that have occurred that included your details. And it turns out test@example.com was involved in a lot of data breaches. My own email is already in the slides, so I might as well put it. So, yay! Lucky me. OK. But say you're a company and you have 100 email addresses from people in your company. You want to check if all of them, if any of them have been involved in some kind of data breach. So maybe one of your employees has had their password leaked. There is this convenient API. And so you can look at, there's documentation here. You can look up any breached account to see if it has been involved in some kind of data breach. Ooh, oh, look, I've done this before. And in the same way, this is the... OK, the live demos are not going to go well today. Yes, OK. This is not very user-friendly, but this is much more friendly if you are writing a program to access this information. Python makes this particularly easy since Python is very good sort of glue code for bringing things together. So using web APIs through Python is a really good way to access all of these tools that are out there for you. So this is how easy it is to fetch something from Have I Been Pwned. This is exactly the same URL that we went to in the browser. You can fetch it using the Python requests library and then inspect the content. So, in the interest of testing the live demo gods, this one's slightly different. This one asks for a particular email address, so I can say test@example.com. It looks it up and gives me, again, all of the pile of JSON information that is provided by haveibeenpwned.com. And I have a slightly different one here as well. And we can use this in a bit of a nicer way. So as an example, actually, I meant to show. If I use, in this case, it gives me a oh, damn. This didn't happen when I was testing it. Nope. OK, so normally it will give you a 404 error message. I could not find this page if the account was not used in any kind of data breach. But in the same way, we can then test that response code and say, well, if it wasn't found, then we know the account is safe. And if it was found, we can use the Python built-in JSON library here to parse that response and then get all of the useful information out of it in a very, very short Python program, which then, if you could imagine easily putting this in a for loop with a giant list of email addresses, and you'd be able to check a whole bunch of them at the same time, as long as you don't hit the rate limit, as we have seen. In the real world, APIs are useful in a business context a lot. You can have, imagine you're a business and you want to publish to all of your social media at the same time. Almost all of the social media platforms have APIs that let you publish through the API, so you can write one program to write one social media post and then publish it everywhere at the same time. In the same way, if you're a business who's looking to capitalize on this, you can make your own social media app that uses all of the APIs, and then you can sell that app to businesses who want to have only one app to post to. So then there's like businesses who are built on top of the APIs of other businesses, and there's this whole ecosystem there. And so generally, you use APIs for automating tasks in the same way that all programs are designed to automate tasks that humans would otherwise be doing. A lot of APIs are providing a specialized data set that you might want to access. If you're a business, there are stock and finance APIs. There are weather APIs. There are sports data APIs. There's a database of poetry. And you can access these APIs as a business. Some of them are paid. And they will provide access to some database that is too big for you to have a copy of, or it's something like the weather, which is updated all of the time, and so someone is providing that as a service. And the last one is a little bit more fuzzy. It's generally there are APIs for doing some task that is otherwise very difficult for you as a programmer to implement. So if you don't want to implement your own image recognition system, there are APIs where you can upload an image and it will tell you what is in that image. In the same way, there are APIs for doing machine translation of text. You can translate stuff. There's a Klingon translation API, which is actually really bad. And a special notable one here is Twilio APIs, who are conveniently a sponsor. They have APIs for allowing you to set up voice calls, send and receive voice calls and text messages, and otherwise access this whole world of like voice and text mobile communication that is otherwise very difficult to set up, especially across countries. So there's lots of cool APIs out there. But for this talk, we're going to focus on just a bunch of tools that are useful for you to access these APIs. So we're going to go through them fairly quickly. And those tools are very useful, not just for like in a business context to actually use for the real world, but just to build fun things to play around with. So some stuff that people have built with APIs just for fun and for the learning experience, presumably, is things like this, where accessing the IMDb API to grab 500 Western titles would be very annoying on your own. People have mashed up different APIs together to say, well, if we use the Netflix API to find out what movies are on Netflix, we can then rank them by the various different rating systems that are out there, so we can find which ones are the best ones, so which ones I can watch. If you're interested in Twitter bots, which are also a lot of fun, I would highly recommend this talk from PyCon in the US 2016 about making Twitter bots. It's really, there's lots of fun ideas in there. But so far, we've only seen two of the tools that you might need to access these web APIs. So firstly, the requests library, and the JSON module for then parsing the response to these requests. So not all APIs are going to be in JSON, but the vast majority of them these days are. And so for the rest of the talk, we're going to go through an example app that I hacked together using an API. And this is the cats versus dogs app, which basically shows you, it's designed to determine conclusively like whether cats or dogs are cuter. So of these two pictures, the specific cat and the specific dog, who thinks the cat is cuter? Yeah, who thinks the dog is cuter? Yeah, the dogs are winning a little bit, but it's a little bit split. And in order to do that, we're going to use the Imgur API. Imgur is a great source of cat and dog pictures, if you know where to look. So we're going to start with that. The documentation is really good. So we're going to look there. And when you're getting started with using some new API, I like to build a little Python program to access it. Wow, that's huge. So we're looking for a particular gallery. We're looking for a subreddit gallery. And so we can find very quickly the URL that we want to access in order to get the information that we need. And we can give a subreddit name and then so a couple of different parameters for that. So if we want the cat pictures subreddit, this is basically all we have to do in order to get all of the information we need about those cat pictures. Or is it? Most APIs that you'll find on the internet have some kind of identification or authentication method that you have to go through. In the case of Imjo, you have to sign up with an account and get a client ID, and then use that client ID whenever you're making a request to the API. And there's a lot of reasons that an API provider will do that, but mostly it's because if someone is spamming the API and sending too much traffic or sending really big requests, they can just block that one identifier, and then the API will keep working for everybody else. So that's basically why it's there. In a lot of cases, it's not a super secure way of doing authentication. Sometimes you'll need to put it as an extra parameter to the request, like that. You have some API key that you put there. In the case of the Imjo API, it's an additional header that you add to the HTTP request. And sometimes if it's like a post request, you need to add the key to the payload that you're sending. So it's not very consistent between different APIs how this actually works. But there's a couple of rules that you need to be careful of when you're using any kind of API key, or indeed any kind of secret key, is do not put the key in your source code. The reason you don't want to put it in your source code is because if you put it in your source code, it will probably end up in your source code repository. So you should also not put your keys in your source code repository, because if you do that, it makes it very easy to accidentally release it publicly on the internet. If you look through various GitHub repositories that are just available on the internet, people have written scripts to go through and find all of the public API keys and all of the secret keys that are out there. Do not put them in your code. This is probably the only scary security thing that I will mention. What to do instead is to have, I use the environment variable. I can't highlight text on a slide. The os.environ. To get an environment variable that's set from outside the code, and you can pull it in. And we'll see a little bit later how to do that. In the case of the Imjo API, you then put that client ID into an extra header that you add to the request, and then it should work. So let's try that. So I have here, I'm going to show everyone. Also, don't put your key in a slide in a talk that's released as a public video, but it's probably less bad. So I will revoke the key later, don't worry. So we can fetch that API. So this is, this is exactly the code that was on the slide. And it's returned to us this giant blob of JSON, which is huge. I wanted to get to the top. Here we go. And it's an object with data with a list, and this list contains information about each of the cat pictures that's at the top of the list. So in that case, we can reasonably simply change our script to parse the JSON response and use the random module to pick a random cat picture from the list of cat pictures returned, and then print out just that cat picture. OK, and we see we have here the URL of a random cat. Hopefully that will load. The demo gods are not happy. OK, while that's loading, here we go. Aww. Where did my slides go? Did I close my slides? Uh-oh. Oh, that's not the right slide. Whoop, jumping ahead. OK. OK, but if we wanted to so we have a script that's fetching a random cat picture, and we want to put this in an app that's public on the internet that then anyone can see, cute cat and dog pictures, because, cute cat and dog pictures should be open to everybody. If you have not already got a favorite web framework, I would recommend Flask. I should probably go back to present mode. Flask is pretty good. It's very simple to get started with a very, very simple web server. So this is all the code that you need to have a web server that will load a page that says, hello, world. And if you don't already have a favorite way of doing this on the cloud, Heroku I would recommend as the best way to get a service, a web page hosted as a complete beginner. They have a free tier, and it is very easy, very well documented, and very easy to get started. If you want to host a very basic Flask app on Heroku, these are all of the files that you need. And then there's a Heroku command line tool that you can install that then lets you deploy it very quickly. So that is what I have used for the cats versus dogs site. And basically, if we put the code that we wrote before for fetching pictures into a separate function, it's very simple to then grab that data, put it into an HTML template, and then have a hopefully working cats versus dogs app that every time you load it, it will pick a new random cat picture and a random dog picture and show them side by side. Fairly straightforward. So this is the toolbox that we've got so far. We're using the Python request library and the JSON module to send and receive messages with a public API. We've learned how to handle API keys and store them in an environment variable. And I probably should mention that Heroku has a really good method of you can go to the admin page and add in environment variables that are then stored in Heroku and are entirely separate from your source code. So you can publish your source code on the internet very easily, and Heroku is keeping your secret keys for use in actual production. We've also had a brief look at Flask and Heroku. And this gets us so far that we can have an app that's public on the internet, and people can use it, and it's fetching public data from an API using only just an authenticator just to say, this is who I am, please don't block me. There's a lot of APIs out there that then let you access the private data of some user. For example, the Facebook API will let you access data on behalf of a user. Now, it would be pretty insecure if those APIs just let you access any user that you wanted. So the user has to then authenticate and say, OK, Facebook, it's OK to give my data to this app. Okay? And the way this is done is with OAuth. And most of the APIs that are out there that let you access data on behalf of a user, for example, the Spotify API will let you modify someone's playlists and play music on their behalf using their account. OAuth is the way that this is done, and this is a standard protocol that's used across. In fact, this is OAuth 2. Yeah. So basically, I, as a user, want to go to the Cats and Dogs app and say, oh, by the way, and for this example, we're going to use Slack integration to post cute pictures of cats and dogs into a Slack channel on behalf of a user. And since everyone is using Slack from the PyCon Slack channel, this seemed like a good example. So I, as a user, need to somehow get it so that the Cats and Dogs API, Cats and Dogs app can make requests to Slack on my behalf. So I go to Cats versus Dogs. And the way this is done is Cats versus Dogs will create a special URL and redirect the user over to the Slack API, over to the Slack service. And then the user will see this, like, please authenticate. Who's seen one of these before where you have to like authorize an app to do something on your behalf? Yeah, you've all seen this. It's basically like this. In the Slack case, it looks a bit like this. And whoops, I can't highlight things. This URL is generated by the Cats versus Dogs app. And we give it our secret client ID to say, yes, Slack, this is, well, it's not actually authenticate, it's just saying who we are. We give it a URL to redirect back to on the Cats versus Dogs app. And the scope is defining which permissions that we want to ask for. So in this case, I'm asking for an incoming webhook permission. There's lots of different permissions. You can ask for permissions to post things on behalf of the user or read all of their channels, or there's lots of very different specific permissions so that the user can see what permissions they're granting to the app in this user interface hosted by Slack. And so when you click the authorize button, it goes back to that redirect URL that was provided in the link in the first place. And Slack will add a special one-time temporary code to that URL, which is basically the code that says, this is the code that you use to verify that the user has clicked the authorize button and what scope that was for. So we make a request to cats versus dogs. It redirects us to Slack. It redirects us back to cats versus dogs with the code included. And once cats versus dogs has that code, it can then make a request using the Python requests module directly to Slack saying, this is my client ID, my special client secret, which again, you should be very careful not to release to anyone publicly, and the code that the user gave me. And Slack says, OK, I've verified who you are. I've verified that the user has authorized you. Here is an access token that will allow you to access that user's data on their behalf. And so the cats versus dog app needs to store that access token, and they can keep it forever and use it. The user can at any time revoke that access token to remove cats versus dogs as an authorized app. And the access token looks something like this. It's not a real access token. But if this is too complicated to implement yourself, conveniently, there are libraries for this. So it's important to understand roughly how it works, but you don't need to implement all of that yourself. Conveniently, there is a Flask library that does this for you. Here is the setup for using Slack OAuth with the Flask OAuth lib. It looks complicated, but it's basically just a bunch of parameters that you shove in values for. And if you want to know what values to put in, you look at the Slack documentation and go, oh, this looks like an authorized URL. I'm going to put it in the authorized URL field. And you can reasonably easily get OAuth working. It will probably not work the first try, but it might work on the fourth try. And once you've got that part set up, there are these functions in the Flask OAuth library that let you create the redirect URL, redirect to it, and fetch the token once the token has been returned to you. So that's all done for you. So hopefully this works. I've added Slack auth. OK, so this should, in theory, if everything works, redirect me to the Slack authorization page if the internet wants to work. That would be good. Everyone stop using the Wi-Fi. I do have a backup plan, but I think it will get there eventually. OK, so bot testing is my Slack channel. In this case, if you have multiple Slack accounts, you can choose it here. But I set up a bot testing channel. Cats versus dogs would like to post to some channel. So I'm going to post to the general channel, and I'm going to authorize the Cats versus Dogs app specifically to post things to that channel. OK, and now I've come back to my Cats versus Dogs page, and this is, oh, it's got a hash there. OK, so I can hopefully send, oh, I don't have Slack open. That might help. While that's loading, or not while that's loading, I'm going to go through our toolbox again. So, so the tools that we covered today, so we've probably covered them in enough detail that if you hadn't seen them before, you would know how to use them. But the documentation for all of these are really good. The request library for making fetches to an API, the JSON module for parsing the response, handling API securely with environment variables, using Flask for web host, and Heroku for hosting an app on the internet. And we've gone through a little bit of how to use OAuth to access data on behalf of another user. Hopefully, Slack, yay, here we go. We now have a cat picture and a dog picture that has shown up in Slack on behalf of the Cats versus Dogs app. OK. Last part, I just want to go through, these are my two favorite places if you are like, I want to build something using an API to develop my skills. These are good places to find that. Actually, before I do that, let's open one of these. So Mashape has like a marketplace. A lot of these are paid, but most of them are free. There's a Yoda Speak API. If you go down, there's, I don't know, a meme generator API, Netflix roulette. I think it's finding something for you. Have a look through here. I wanted to kind of pick a bunch of highlights, but there were just too many things to choose from. And another cool source that I found is essentially this guy's public GitHub repository, which is a giant list of things. So if you're interested in science, there's a NASA API and a sort of sunrise, sunset, and latitude API. If you're interested in anything, you will find an API for it. Sport, it's pretty good. Okay. So I would highly recommend checking that out. Have a go. Even if you don't know what you want to build yet, pick an API and get something working. And by the time you've got it working, you'll have all of these ideas for what you want to do with it. So give it a shot. Thank you. And are there any questions? Also, the API, the URLs are there as well, if you want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, Katie, for the talk, and Coffee Mug for giving this talk and preparing it.
Thank you.
We have a couple of minutes for questions. Anybody up for questions who is from a minority or non-dominant group in this audience? Please come up.
I was just curious, in your travels, what's the most interesting or quirky API that you've come across?
Ooh, interesting. I mean, interesting and quirky are kind of different. There's lots of APIs that I've looked at and gone, man, I want to find an excuse to use that. But I have not yet found an excuse for it yet. I really like that there's, actually, probably the weirdest one was a cow say API. It was, you fetch, and it returns, you just fetch it and it returns to you an ASCII picture of a cow with an ASCII speech bubble with a random quote in it.
Oh, yeah, I think I actually know this one.
That's probably the quirkiest. On top of the Yoda Speak API. Or there's lots of, like a fandom for some fantasy series will have a database API where you can fetch information about the characters, and they've gone to a lot of effort to categorize things in a consistent way. So if you have a particular fandom that you're into, you might find that there's a database of that. For computer, there'd be a Minecraft API just for data about different kinds of Minecraft objects and mobs and stuff. Yeah.
That makes sense. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right.